Welcome to week 28 of our series, The Blessed Life, a study of the Sermon on the Mount. Keep watching as we discuss how to distinguish between true and false faith, both in those who claim to be teachers and also in our own lives.
Let me ask you a question just to begin. What makes someone a Christian? When you look at it, what makes that person a Christian? Is it possible for someone to claim be a Christian when they're really not? Or even tougher, is it possible for someone to think they're a Christian when they're really not? Is being a Christian a matter of externals? Is it just making a claim to be a Christian? Is it having the right belief systems? Is it doing the right things and not the wrong things, external behavior? Let me ask another way. Is being a Christian a matter of what you do? Is it a matter of what you think? Or is it something deeper? Is it a matter of who you are? Now, when I was young, a number of years ago when my kids were younger, they loved to dress up in various costumes. And many of you have young kids, you understand, what that's like. And, the boys would be a superhero and they'd be flying all around. And the girls would be princesses or they would dress up as different animals. But the thing is, regardless of the outfit that they wore, regardless of the costume, it really never changed who they were. I have my oldest daughter, I remember, she loved to put on this wonderful dog outfit. And she would put it on, and she would really believe that she was a dog. She's the one there on the left side. She's got her tongue out, and the fact is, she would go hours where she wouldn't speak a word. She would just pant, or she would bark, and she would just be a dog, and that was her. And now, when I look at that, you say, man, that's so cute, and it's hard to believe that my little girl's getting married, and she's growing up. But I think of that. What you realize is she could put on the costume of a dog and even take on the behaviors of a dog, but in reality, she never stopped being a little girl. It illustrates a basic truth. Who we are is always defined by our inner character, our inner essence. It's not by the costume we wear or the appearance that we try to put on. Now, this truth is obvious when we're talking about costumes, but it's something that is far less obvious when we talk about issues of faith. But it's just as true. Many people think that being a Christian means little more than affirming the right religious beliefs and putting on the right religious behaviors, in a sense, putting on the right Christian costume, thinking that if I wear the right costume, well, that would make me a Christian. But Jesus teaches that the real issue isn't our appearance, it isn't the external, it's in our character. And it's a basic truth that just as putting on the dog outfit didn't make her a dog, and so putting on a Christian outfit doesn't make a person a Christian. A relationship with God is something that is who we are. It's our inner character. It's not the appearance that we put on. It's not even just a matter of affirming the right beliefs externally. It's literally who we are. See, now that's a huge part of what Jesus is teaching here this morning. When we looked at the passage, we saw in verse 16, he says, you will recognize them by their fruits. In verse 20, he repeats the same idea. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits. And he's teaching this basic truth. When it comes to costumes and children, or when it comes to trees, what we realize is that, no, you look at the fruit. The fruit reveals who we really are. The fruit, it's not the fruit that determines the true nature of the tree. Putting on different fruit, if you come and you try to tape different fruit on a tree, it doesn't change the nature. But what you have is the true nature of the tree will be revealed by the fruit that it naturally produces. Now, to understand this, what I want to do is to kind of step back and to look at, again, some bigger issues within the Sermon on the Mount, because what we're seeing is that this last section, it's really Jesus summing up the whole sermon. These aren't new ideas that Jesus is trying to communicate. What he's doing is that he's taking ideas out of the sermon and he's saying, okay, let me conclude them. Let me wrap them up. And so when we're looking at this, what I want to do is to say, what are the big themes? For those that have been a part of the community church and have attended here somewhat regularly, you know that as we've gone through this message over the course of months now, there's certain themes that have been kind of reoccurring throughout the Sermon on the Mount that kind of define what Jesus is saying. And first of all, as is told even by the title of the series that we're talking about, we've seen that the Sermon on the Mount is all about a blessing or an invitation to the blessed life. We've seen from the very beginning of his message in what's called the Beatitudes, Jesus started by stating in the Beatitudes repeatedly, blessed are those, blessed are the ones, blessed are the poor, blessed are those who mourn. And as he repeats this again and again, what we see is that this isn't just a different thought. This was an outline. This was an introduction to the theme that would define the whole thing. And when he says this, he says, here's what this is. I'm promising you the blessed life. If you understand this and apply it, you'll find the blessed life. The person who embraces and lives out the teaching here will discover what it means to live the blessed life. And the blessed life means simply this, that we live the life that we're created for. That we all know what it means to long for something more, to realize that there's a sense that we're created for something more and we long for that. And it says, no, when we understand this, we realize that we're created for a relationship with God, and when we have right relationship with God, we have a right understanding of everything else in life. And suddenly there we find the happiness, we find the peace, we find the contentment that we long for. So this is a key to he's saying this is the path to the blessed life. And not only that, but then he says, when you look at this path is contrasted to another path. And throughout the whole sermon, he contrasts two ideas, and he's making it very clear here. Two ideas, he's contrasting religion with those who follow him, and saying there's a big difference. You see, again, we've seen these ideas, especially now here at the very end. So last week, he talked about two paths, and this week we talk about two trees. In a couple weeks, we're going to talk about two houses. And he's talking about these two ideas. And the first is religion. Religion focuses on rules and external conformity. Religion is all about, okay, what are the things that we're supposed to do? It's what are the rules that we have to keep to make God happy, to be a good person, and then how do you have the self-discipline, how do you try harder to somehow do a better job of keeping those rules? But it's about self-discipline, self-effort, and external conformity to the rules. Now, Jesus says, now, if we follow him, it isn't about just changing what we do. It isn't about rules. It's literally about changing who we are. You see, following Jesus isn't about rules. It's about a relationship. And it's about a relationship with God that literally changes our character, where we let him change us internally. We let him change our heart. And that means submitting to Christ, this relationship where we say, God, I realize that I'm a sinner. I need you to forgive me. I submit to you. I give you the right to change who I am. I give you the right to expose the sin in me and then to change it. And see, what we realize is that if I let God change who I am, if I let him change me from the inside out, when I'm changed on the inside, it will always result in an outward change. It will always result in a transformed life. But the transformed life isn't something that's external, that I'm trying to keep rules. It actually becomes natural as a natural expression of who I am. Now, that's the idea that he builds on now in the main image that he gives us here today. He gives us a picture of a tree and its fruit. And he's building on the same idea. Look what we see. We read a few minutes ago in let me start in verse 16. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits. Now what Jesus is teaching is something that's an obvious truth when we come to biological and the physical world. We sit there and we say, well, yeah, this is a kind of obvious example. To say that a tree will always kind of produce the fruit that is a natural expression of its DNA, that's something that's obvious, right? A fig tree is never going to produce apples. You're never going to go to a grapevine and see figs growing there. To see watermelons on a grapevine. No, that doesn't happen. Now, the fact of the matter is that that's natural. We understand that. And it's possible to go and to make it look a certain way. It's possible you can go to a tree and you can tape apples on it. But if it's not an apple tree, it's going to look fake. And sooner or later in time, the apples fall off and you realize that there are no other apples growing there. And so if you see a tree and it's a fruit-bearing tree and you don't know what kind of tree it is, you just wait a little while and you see the fruit that grows and suddenly you realize, oh, that's kind of what kind of tree we have. Now, what Jesus says is that just as this principle is true in the physical and the biological world, it's just as true in the spiritual world. Being a Christian isn't a matter of rule keeping. It isn't a matter of just saying the right things. And to say that I can keep the rules or if I can just affirm the right beliefs and that makes me a Christian He says it's just like saying you could go tape some apples on a branch and think that that makes it an apple tree. No, it doesn't. It doesn't work that way. See, because following Christ isn't primarily a matter of what I do, it's who I am. And so it's not a matter of somehow trying to tape the right beliefs or tape the right, the right fruit on our lives. It isn't a matter of putting on a certain costume and thinking if we have this costume that therefore we become. Now, we might put on the costume and get people to think that we're something. You see, but it doesn't change who we are. If we let God change us. See, if I come to God and I say, God, what I realize is my need isn't a changed behavior, it's a changed character. What happens is I come and he changes my heart. He changes my character. And the result over time will always be a changed life. Because that's natural. So we see that our relationship with Jesus always results in a changed life. Now, what I want to do is that's kind of the introductory thoughts. And now what I want to do is to dive deeper and to see how Jesus develops this. Because he starts by saying, okay, now this is the idea. Now I want you to apply it to the way that you distinguish between wolves and sheep. And you look at that and you say, okay, what do you mean by that? Look at verse 15 again. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. Now, what he's doing here is he's saying, I want you to take these principles and I want you to apply them to how you discern between true and false prophets, true and false teachers, those who are pastors or seek to be spiritual leaders. And how do you know who you should follow and who you should reject? Now, to make this clear, when it looks and it says, beware false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, you see now throughout the Bible, the imagery of sheep is always used to describe those who are followers of God. And so, for example, we all know Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. And so we talk in terms of sheep. Or take for another example, Psalm 95, for he is our God and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. We see in Luke 15, the parable of the good shepherd, who leaves the 99 and goes and finds the one. Or in John chapter 10, look what Jesus says there. Truly I say to you, he who does not enter by the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls out his own sheep by name and leads them out. And when he's brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow them, for they know his voice. And so this whole idea of saying, okay, it's not only that we are that we are sheep, but it also uses terms of saying that God is the shepherd and that God appoints other people likewise to serve as shepherds. Now here's what he said when he said, okay, now that there are sheep in wolves' clothing, he's saying is there are people that are claiming to be sheep that are trying to take the appearance of the sheep, and they're coming in the clothing and the garb or the appearance, the costume of a sheep in a sense, but in reality their inner being is that they're not sheep. In reality, their inner being is that they're wolves. They're not only, not a true follower of God, but their ideas that they have are ones that are going to be actually harmful to the people of God. And so that's what he says. And when he switches metaphors and he goes from animals to trees in verse 16 and following, he says, you will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree that bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. And he's saying that just as a wolf can't wear could wear sheep's clothing, but it doesn't make him a sheep. He can't grow sheep's coat. His character isn't changed. That likewise in the same way, you can't put grapes on thorns and, say, well, therefore it makes it a grapevine. It's not natural. It's not what's really there. And so in the same way, what he's saying is this. It's possible for someone to affirm the ideas of the Beatitudes. I like what's there. And really like the idea and go to church and affirm the ideas and never be transformed by them and to really never truly be a different kind of person. All that we're doing is we're trying to put fruit on the tree. We're putting a costume on. It's possible to keep all the rules of the religion, but in doing so, all we're doing is, again, we're wearing a costume. It's not who we are. The real question isn't what costume you're wearing. The real question is, who are you? What are you underneath the costume? Who are you? You see, the false prophets were sitting there teaching a message, and their focus was on, why are they ravenous wolves? Because they're all about, well, here's what you do. They were focused on the externals and keeping people from really surrendering to Jesus Christ and letting them change the behavior. But just like my daughter didn't become a dog when she put on a dog costume, so in the same way, people don't become true followers of Christ because they put on a Christian costume of right rules or even affirming the right ideas. So it's not what I do, it's who I am. And so when we apply this, what we've got to realize, he says, okay, how do you apply this when you think about teachers? Well, the important thing is to focus on character. But look what he talks about here. When he talks about this idea and he says, look at the fruit, here's what he's saying. Again, throughout the whole series, what have we seen? We've seen repeatedly, it's not about what we do, it's about who we are. And he said, now take that same principle and apply it to how you look at those who would claim to be spiritual leaders in the church. Don't just pick up the book because somebody wrote it and it's supposed to be good. Look at the author. Look at not only do they say it well and you like what they say, look at who the person is. Because when you look at, I think even when a church, a lot of times a church, if we're without a pastor, or if you don't have a church and you're visiting different churches and you say, well, can we find a good speaker? Does he have the right education? Do we like what he says? Does he have the externals of education and have the right gifts? And so we choose a person based on that. But the primary focus can often become external. But the whole idea is to say, no, the gospel is about internal. It's not about having the right person with the right qualifications. Do they give evidence of the fact that they have allowed God to change their lives? That they're really sheep? That their true nature is such that they are being transformed? See, when you look at this, here's the issues. When we think of teachers or leaders, we often think in terms of our culture, and our culture values teaching. And when you think of teaching, what do you have? A teacher will try to teach the student what they know. So if I teach you what I know, then I've done a good job of teaching. So therefore, we go and try to find a teacher who's good at teaching what they know. But the biblical model isn't teaching. When you look at the biblical model is discipleship. God doesn't call us to be good teachers. He calls us to be disciples, to be being discipled and to be a discipler of others. Now, there's a huge difference because a teacher teaches what he knows. A discipler teaches who he is. If I'm a good teacher and I taught you what I know, then I've achieved my goal as a teacher. As a discipler, it's not just what I know, it's who I am, how I apply those truths, what it actually looks like in my life. That's why Jesus' disciples didn't just go to school with him. They walked around with him. They traveled with him. They experienced life with him. That's what discipleship is. It's about experiencing life. This is taught throughout the Bible. Look, examples. Look what Jesus says in Luke 6. A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher. You see, what does it mean? If I am a disciple, being discipled, then I'm seeking to become like the one who is discipling me. Or take, for example, another passage. 1 Corinthians Paul talks about his own life and his own ministry. It says, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. It's not, here's all the things that I know, but no, look at how I'm imitating Christ and I'm trying to become more and more like Christ. And as you see me become more and more like Christ, becoming more and more like me. See, he's trying to say my job isn't to just be a teacher. My job is to be a discipler. It's to be a model. So what that means is that anyone that would seek to be a spiritual leader should base their leadership not on the externals. Now, is it important to have the right education, to have the right gifts? Yeah, those things are important, but they're not the most important. The most important thing is this someone who is exemplifying the character of a changed life? When I take can you gain anything from me in the Sermon on the Mount? It's not just how well I've explained it. But hopefully, if you look at me, hopefully you could say, well, here's how he's applying it. This is what it actually looks like to live in real life. This is an example. See, because when we talk about being a disciple, that means that a spiritual leader is being an example. God calls us to be examples. Now, here's where I've got to be careful, though, because it's real easy to go in the wrong direction with this. I know as a pastor I'm called to be an example because my role is a discipler, and that's true, again, of anybody in spiritual leadership. It should be true of anyone that you're learning from and growing from. So I understand that. When I preach on Sunday mornings, that means that, again, if I've gone through the Sermon on the Mount, it's not just, okay, here's the things that I've learned that I want to teach you. I've got to realize that before I can say anything, I've got to let God speak to me. I've got to let God convict me. I've got to surrender these things to me. When we talk about, resolving conflict and forgiveness, and I've got to say, who is it that I've not dealt with? I've got to apply these things to my life because that's the basis of my ability to be able to share anything with you. But here's the hard part, even as I strive to do that, and I seek to be an example, I know at the same time I'm not perfect. I'm a long way away from perfect. That I am still one who is in the process of letting God change me. Now here's the problem, is that it's very, very dangerous for pastors, for leaders first, and then for everyone else that follows that to say, okay, now what we need to do is because I need to be an example, well, therefore, I can't show any weakness. Therefore, I can't anybody ever let me see me struggle. I've got to be a perfect image. I've got to work hard to never show any sin, any struggle. Because if you do, then what would you think? Because then I'm not the example. And so what happens is that pastors do this. And then as you see the pastor do it, then the rest of us do it. We come to church and we start to say, well, church is a place where you never show weakness. We never admit your problem. Where you pretend to have the perfect marriage, where you pretend that your kids are perfect, and you make sure that they behave the right way because you don't want them to embarrass you, because you don't want them to make you look bad. You ever face that struggle? Yeah, I face it, big time. I remember, even when our last church, I was pastor down in South Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina, and my first week there, I remember they had a Wednesday night program, and so we go to the Wednesday night program. My kids were very young, and as we're walking in, one of them decides to throw a major tantrum. And we're sitting there in the middle of the courtyard, and everybody's walking into their classes, and we had a dinner, and I'm sitting there thinking, oh, everybody's thinking he's a terrible dad. I'm so embarrassed because part of me thinks, I want to be a good image, I want to be an example, and they're saying that I'm not the perfect dad. What do? The fact is, at times, your kids embarrass you. I can think of one time, we had a birthday party at Chuck E. Cheese. And we're there early, and I'm walking around with my one daughter, and she just so happened to notice in the back room there's Chuck E. Cheese's outfit was hanging up. And so, so the guy that was going to dress up as Chuck E. Cheese's outfit's there. And so later in the day, all the kids are there, and Chuck E. Cheese comes out for the birthday party. And everybody's having fun, and the handler says, okay, Chuck E. Cheese needs to go, and he needs to go get some cheese or something like that. And my daughter stands up and yells in front of everybody, hey, everybody, let's go watch Chuck E. Cheese get undressed. And I'm sitting there, oh, my goodness, what are they thinking? This is the pastor's daughter. And they're like, what are you teaching her? And I said, I'm at work all the time. It's my wife. She spends time with my wife. It's her, I thought about it, but the thing is, you could try to explain it, but the fact is sometimes innocently, and sometimes they mess up. Now, what do? What's tempting as a pastor, and I know it's tempting for all of us, is we want to try to correct the behavior. Don't say that, don't do that, you're going to embarrass me. But what happens is when we do that, we're not shaping the hearts of our children, we're shaping their behavior. We're teaching them to be Pharisees that focus on external conformity, religion, rather than saying, okay, how do we work on your heart? And the issue with our kids shouldn't be having them look good. Even with my kids, they would say, well, is there pressure to be the pastor's kid? Yeah, there is sometimes. I would tell them all the time, you're not the pastor's kid. You're my child. I just so happen to be the pastor, but you're not the pastor's kid. And I give them the freedom to mess up, and they can't embarrass me because you know what? I'm not going to pretend to be the perfect dad. I'm not. And I don't have perfect kids. And I don't want to put that pressure on them. Because if I do, I'm not only shaping their heart the wrong way, I'm about external conformity rather than really letting God change my heart. So how in the world do you hold things together? How do we say that I'm supposed to be a model of of what God's doing in my life, that I'm a model of changed life, but at the same time that I recognize that I'm not a perfect person and I shouldn't try to pretend it because now I'm living religion? And here's the key. See, yes, we're called to be a model. And I remember even at times having someone tell me in college, somebody I was doing like an internship at a church, and this pastor was telling me, you're called to be a model. That what that means is, his definition is that you should always have the right answer. Don't ever show weakness. And that's what some people even taught me. I'm called to be a model. So I looked up the definition of a model, and I said, what's a miniature representation of something? A small duplication of the real thing. Okay, is that what I'm called to be, a miniature representation? I mean, is that me? Is this like, okay, a little, that's amazing. They have bobblehead pastors. It's like, I have a lot less hair than that, so that can't be me. And, so God has called me to be a model, but here's the key. God has called me to be a model of the process, not the product. You want to model the product of perfect Christian living of someone who never sins? That's Jesus Christ. That's not me. And you know what? I'm not going to pretend. Because pretending both misshapes me, because it makes me focus on religion and externals. It misshapes my kids, and it's a bad example for you. So then in a lot of churches, we become more focused about what we pretend to be and about appearing the right way and never admitting our weakness than we are about really surrendering in a place of grace. Well, you know what we've got to realize is that God has not called me to model the product. I am not perfect. I am a sinner. I struggle in a whole bunch of areas, and I will admit that openly. If you're looking for a perfect pastor, I'm the wrong one. That doesn't happen here. But you know what? God has called me to model the process. So in the midst of my struggle, the question is, am I surrendering? Am I growing? You want to see how this plays out? Let me take you to another passage. I'm going to go to Philippians chapter 3 because Paul exemplifies this in his own ministry. Look what he says in Philippians 3. It starts out, it says, brothers, join in imitating me. Keep your eyes on those who walk according to the example you have in us. Now you look at this. And at first it seems like, he's confident. He's saying, join me. I'm the product. Do what I'm doing. That's what it looks like. But that's not at all what he's saying. You see, let's look back and so go back a couple verses and let's go back to verse 9. Being found in him, not having a righteousness that comes from the law, that's what comes from faith in Christ. The righteousness of God that depends on faith. So saying I don't have it together. My righteousness isn't what I'm doing. It's what Christ has given me. And what is it? That I might know him and the power of his resurrection, that I might share in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death. And so what is it? What is he saying? The key is it's not about religion. It's not about rules. Before this, he said, I used to keep the rules and they're all rubbish. What is it about? It's about knowing Christ. It's about a relationship with him. It's about the idea that we talk in our vision statement, our mission statement, to know Christ. That's what we're all about, to know him. To be focused on a relationship with him and let that relationship change us. And when it changes us, what does it look like? We grow to be mature. What's that maturity look like? Look at how Paul describes it. Not that I've already obtained all this or already made perfect, but I press on to make it my own because Christ Jesus made me his own. He's saying my maturity, my example is not that I have it all together because I don't have it all together. I've not obtained it. I am not perfect. But what am I doing? I'm pressing on. And how do I make it my own? Not by me trying harder and me doing it, no, but by realizing that Jesus has made me his own. By realizing and accepting the grace of Jesus Christ. Brothers, I do not consider that I've made it my own, but one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind, straining forward to what lays ahead. I press on toward the goal of the prize of the upward calling in Christ Jesus. Let those who are mature think this way, and if any of you think otherwise, God will reveal that to you also. So what is maturity? Maturity isn't that you have it all together. Maturity is that you realize that you don't have it all together. So when he says in verse 17, join in imitating me and keep your eyes on those who walk according to the example that you have in us, what I want you to realize is that his whole idea is it's not like follow my example that I've got it all together, but he's saying follow my example and that I realize that I don't have it all together, and my example is in surrender. My example is not that I am the product, the example is that I am in the process. And he defines maturity. Maturity is being aware of how sinful you are and how much you need Jesus Christ. Maturity isn't totally defeating sin. It's being aware of how sinful we are. So what does that mean? As a pastor, I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to say, I'm struggling here. I'm going to try to model that. But part of it also means that in a community, this is not a place that we have it all together. This is not a perfect church. It's not a church of perfect people. It's a church filled with fallen people who are trying to grow in maturity, and we become more mature by we realize how much we need Christ. And that means that when we struggle, we don't hide it. We don't try to look a certain way. We don't try to appear a certain way. We don't put on shows. We don't put on costumes. Because when you understand that, you realize that putting on a costume, it's pretending. It's not about that. It's about letting God change me. But to let God change me, I have to be aware of my need. I have to admit my need. I admit my fallenness. See, being a Christian in a true Christian community means it's a place of grace. And it's a place when we mess up, we admit that we mess up and we bring it to Christ. And instead of looking down at people, man, I can't believe you messed up. I can't believe you don't have perfect kids. I can't believe you don't. Instead, we should be a place where we say, you know what, I'm proud of you for surrendering to Christ. That's a place that we are living grace. That is a place where it's defined not by our accomplishments, not by our performance, not by the costume we wear, but by the fact that God is changing us. And the fruit of that change is not total performance. The fruit of that change is surrender, which means that over time, as we surrender, we become more and more like Him. Not because we try harder, we keep rules, but because we let God change us. Now, how do we apply this in our own life? Because when you look at this, what we see is that he starts off by saying, okay, apply it to the way that you think about teachers, but it doesn't just apply to me. See, he starts off and says, yeah, look at that. Look at and realize that if it's all about who you are, then when you think about a teacher, it shouldn't just be what they know or the behavior they have or the education, or it should be about their changed life. But okay, if that's true for me as a pastor, is it any less true for you as a follower of Christ? See, the principle here is one that applies to all of us. That every one, we have to apply this into our own life. You see, there are many people that will go and will affirm Jesus Christ. I believe him. We have the right theology. We'll have the right action, especially on Sunday. And then we leave church and there's very little difference in our life. And the fact is, all we're doing is we're putting on the costume. We're thinking that if I dress up like a Christian and if I bark and whine in the right way, that's going to doesn't make you a dog. It doesn't make you a Christian. And the reality is that the issue is not performance. It's about surrender. It's about not the costume we wear. It's about the character that we have. It's about realizing that all of us by nature are sinners, that we acknowledge that sin. We say, God, I've not arrived there, and I want you to come and I admit that sin. I ask you to forgive me and give me grace to make me the right kind of person. That's how we come to Jesus Christ in the first place. You know what it means to be a Christian? That's all it means. God, I admit with you I'm a sinner. I need to be forgiven. It's not about me trying to be good. It's about me acknowledging my need, recognizing that Jesus Christ died on the cross for my sins. God, I ask you to take my sins, pay for them in Jesus Christ. Give me his righteousness. God, make me the person that you want me to be. Change me from the inside out. I give you the right to point out my sin. I give you the right to convict me. I give you the right to change me. That's what it means to become a Christian. But it also is what it means to grow as a Christian. You see, because for every one of us, for myself and for every person that here that is a follower of Christ, what does it mean to grow in that? It's not put on the costume, put on the fruit. It's know that I continue, as Paul said, to say, I've not arrived there, but I realize that there's still things that God points out in my life, and I admit my sin. I have the maturity of admitting how sinful that I still am. The things that God needs to change, not only my behavior, but my heart, my character. And I admit that, I admit my need, and I ask Jesus to forgive my sins, and I ask him to change me, because I am modeling not a product, but a process of continuing to surrender to Jesus Christ. And so a couple closing questions. First of all, is simply this: what does the fruit of your life reveal about the true nature of your heart? The fact is that all of us can come on and we can come on Sunday and we can put on the costume and we can pretend to be a Christian. Well, what about the fruit of your life? What about not what you're here on Sunday, but if honest appraisal, who you are on Monday through Friday? Who are you at home when there's stress? Who are you at work? What does the fruit of your life reveal about the true nature of your heart? Again, if you don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ, I want you to realize that he invites you to it today, to come to him today and say, God, I agree with you, I'm a sinner. I ask you to forgive my sins through Jesus Christ. I give you the right to change me, to realize that it's not just about trying harder or looking good, but Father, it's something internal that needs to be changed. And while I can try through self-discipline to try to change the fruit, to change the external, God, I can never change who I am. And if that's what I need, my only hope is grace through Jesus Christ. If you've never asked Christ in your heart as your Lord and Savior, I pray that you do so today, that you cry out, God, I ask you to forgive me, and he will. For those of us who have done that, there's an ongoing process. And so we have to ask, what is the fruit of my life revealing about the true nature of my heart? And if it's revealing areas of my heart that I've not surrendered to Christ, are you willing to surrender? Are you willing to let him change you? I'm not talking about keeping rules. I'm saying, are you willing to surrender and let him change you from the inside out? Second question, to what degree is your life a model of the process of surrendering to Christ? See, I have to struggle with this every week. Again, but the idea that he says here, it says start by applying to those that would seek to spiritual leaders, but only because we should be doing this as an example for everyone else to follow, because everyone who's a follower of Christ, that's what it means to be a follower of Christ. And so if you look at your own life, to what degree is your life a model of that, of surrendering to Jesus Christ, of letting him change you from the inside out? Again, there might be some here that you've been hiding. There have been areas in your life that you haven't been willing to surrender. And God's pursuing you today. He's pursuing you not that you'd walk away and that you'd feel guilty and that you'd feel terrible. And he's pursuing you because he wants you to come to the point where you say, will you admit that you have this need? Will you come and allow me to forgive you? Allow me to begin the process of changing you. Because as we surrender to Jesus Christ, he does change us from the inside out to make us a new kind of person, a person that understands what it means to live the blessed life.
Thanks for watching. If you have any questions about what we talked about, Jesus Christ or church, feel free to reach out to us on Facebook, Instagram, or by email. The links are in the description.